It's John T for the Boxing Voice, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined this evening by Sky Sports presenter and boxing expert Andy Clarke. How are you, Andy?
Good, thanks. You?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for taking time out on a Friday evening about 8:30. I know you've got a big day tomorrow with a big card in Gibraltar. So how's the week been for Matchroom and Sky Sports?
Yeah, good. I think it's interesting going somewhere new. I think logistically it was a big challenge. And Matchroom have risen to that challenge every time. You know, right out of the gate, starting with fight camp and then the residency at Wembley. We'll be back at Wembley in a couple of weeks, and it just looks fantastic. You know, the visuals are amazing with The Rock and all the venues that they've chosen for the press conferences and for the weigh-in. It may be kind of needed a little something COVID boxing, for want of a better term, because as good a job as they've done, it gets a bit samey when you've got the same kind of backdrop. So doing it somewhere new, although it has been a challenge, definitely is. I think it just adds something a bit extra to this fight, and you know, the yacht that everybody's staying on in the harbour, and it's just unusual. You know, it's like this period hopefully will never be repeated again. So these are all kinds of collector's items, and this is definitely one of them, I think.
Yeah, you have to take your hat off to Eddie. He knows how to put a show on, definite. But when he first said he was going to Gibraltar, as a fan, I kind of thought, is it because Dillian doesn't want to come back and do the self-isolation in England? But actually, the whole spectacle all week, the sun's shining, you've got the Rock in the backdrop, as you say, you've got the water there, the ring for the weigh-in and the public workout almost looks like it's on the edge of the water. All the Sky Sports and Matchroom people are out there working. They're all putting it on Instagram. You can tell they're all having a great time. So I'm sure it's going to be a great spectacle tomorrow night. Which leads me on to, if that's okay, we'll start off with the main fight. Obviously, Dillian Whyte is trying to avenge the first defeat against Povetkin. What were your thoughts on fight night the first time round, Andy? And did you think it was a shock? Was it a punch from the gods, like some are saying? Or maybe did Dillian switch off?
I always thought it was a tough fight for him, because Povetkin's just a proven good fighter. We thought he was lucky to get the win against Michael Hunter in his previous fight. I thought Michael Hunter deserved to win it on points, but that wasn't any massive indication that he was sliding rapidly downhill. People will point to his age, but he's always trained very hard. He's always been a model professional within that Russian system, if you like, since he was a young boy. So he's only really known one way to live his life, and that's with complete and utter discipline. So I always thought that he was a potential handful, but Dillian started really well. I gave Povetkin, I think, one of the early rounds. He did some good body punching, but when he took him down twice in that fourth round, you didn't get the impression that he was going to last too much longer. And then the knockout, it's interesting hearing people's theories on one-punch knockouts as to how they choose to describe them and how they choose to kind of frame that discussion. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no such thing as a lucky punch in boxing, because they all go in there to land punches. They don't land every punch they throw. We know what the stats are. It's not that kind of a sport. It's not. It's a high fail rate sport in that sense. But every time they throw, the point is that they want to land, and that was set up, that shot too. You couldn't say that, you know, he was hopelessly under pressure, head bowed, just winged a big overhand in, and it hit the button. He knew what he was doing with that. It was a punch of the highest quality, and behind on the cards though he may have been fairly drastically at that point, it's a fifth round knockout, which by definition is not a close fight. There's nothing unlucky about that for Dillian Whyte. There's nothing lucky about it for Povetkin. So I thought it was amazing to see, because I was about 10 yards away, and obviously there's no crowd and it's late at night and the wind's kind of whispering through the trees at Maskell's in this kind of fairly stately home sort of setting. It kind of took you back to the old bare knuckle days, what it must have been like then, when people are kind of trying to get a fight on and the police are chasing them around and they find the most kind of desolate spot they can to do it. It was amazing. As for this time around, I do make Dillian a pretty heavy favourite. I think that he will maybe be a bit more cautious than he was the first time, but I don't think he was gung-ho and reckless. I think it just happened. So I think he'll take his time with it. I think he'll feel that Povetkin doesn't really have too many rounds in him, that maybe time is beginning to take a little bit of a toll on him. There was some evidence of that in the previous 4 rounds we saw. He has had COVID. I don't know how bad that was, but it's not a good thing. So I think I would probably go for Dillian by stoppage, kind of after 8 or 9. But I think if it went to points that he would win it, because I don't think Povetkin's got 12 hard rounds in him. I think he's maybe got about 6.
Interesting. I must admit, I had it very similar in the first fight. I thought Dillian was controlling it. Clearly, he'd knocked him down twice, as you say. I'm with you with this punch out the gods things. Lots of people were saying it's a punch out the gods. I think Dillian may have been quoted as saying that, but actually, he executed it perfectly and he stepped straight on it. I think some people at the time might have felt that Povetkin or Whyte would definitely beat Povetkin, but for me, when I looked at it, Povetkin had only been beaten by AJ and Klitschko, who were big heavyweights, and Whyte was a similar kind of size to Povetkin, and I think the age bit, people thought he wouldn't be able to last the pace, but he found that knockout and it was a great finish, which just builds up the next one. Do you think that Dillian might be a bit worried or nervy because of what happened, that he might approach it a little bit more cautiously?
I mean, there's always a chance when something like that has happened that you might be a bit more gun shy. You might take a kind of different approach. I mean, we saw the way that Anthony Joshua boxed against Andy Ruiz in the rematch. And in a lot of ways, the circumstances of the two fights are quite similar because it's a must win. Dillian just has to win. Another defeat would be fairly catastrophic for his career, really. So he just needs to get the win, and it doesn't really matter how he does it. And when somebody's knocked you out once, what fighters typically don't do is go straight into a rematch with the same person. I mean, we looked into this before Saudi, and Floyd Patterson had managed to do it. You know, he went in with Ingemar Johansson, got knocked out, took the immediate rematch, knocked him out. Lennox Lewis did it against Hasim Rahman, immediate rematch, knocked out, and then won by knockout. It's very, very unusual that a heavyweight, you would take that immediate rematch after getting KO'd and then manage to get the win. It's you know, it's a challenge that people don't generally take on for a reason, but he feels that, and he activated that rematch clause immediately. I was in the bus with him on the way back from fight camp, back to the hotel, back from Matchroom to the hotel, and he was adamant even at that point that he knew what he'd done wrong, that he'd made a mistake, and that he wanted the rematch as soon as possible. And originally it was going to be December. I think it's probably quite a good thing that it's ended up not being quite that quick. But I think there's always bound to be some kinds of demons just lurking, because if it's happened once, it can happen again. That's just pure logic, isn't it? You know, it'd be pointless to say that it can't, because it has already. But he's never really struck me, to be honest, as somebody who worries too much about things that he feels he maybe can't control. And I think when he described it as a punch from the gods, I think that's probably what he meant by that. Although he did say afterwards he made a mistake and he knew what he'd done wrong. I didn't really ever see a big mistake there. I just saw an amazing piece of boxing from Povetkin. So I think he's pretty good at. I think he'll have squared that away quite quick. That it happened. Yeah, it could happen again. How likely is it? Not very. So it's not something you really want to be spending your time going nuts about. Because I mean, if you did that, you'd just never get in there in the first place, would you? I don't think.
No, absolutely. And I think you can't take anything away from Dillian in terms of he's got balls, if you like. He's a street fighter as well. I don't doubt for 1 second that he considered going to take a warm-up one before that fight. He wanted it. He knows what to do to avenge it. So all set up for tomorrow. That'd be fantastic. Okay, so moving on to the next one. I'm loving the look of this one. We've got Cheeseman against JJ Metcalf. Real 50-50 on paper for me. Spoke to a lot of people this week with predictions, and it is, some people are saying, the experience of Cheeseman and the come forward bit, but Metcalf's maybe a bit slick, and it just makes up for a great fight.
Yeah, this was the fight that kind of jumped off the card at you, wasn't it, really, when you saw them all made? Because we almost saw this a while ago. It would have been back towards the end of 2017, I think. They got put together in a final eliminator, and Liam Williams was stripped of the title, and we all just assumed that the board would kick it up from final eliminator to full title fight for the vacant title. And we were all kind of gutted when they didn't do that. They decided not to do that and kept it as a final eliminator. And I think it was Cheeseman of the two who pulled out, but I think Metcalf would have pulled out if Cheeseman hadn't pulled out, because both teams would have felt it was too big a fight, and potentially a bigger fight down the road to not be for a title. So they've been kind of circling each other for a bit. And the interesting thing about them really is that Cheeseman, although he's 25 just, I think, he's got a few miles on the clock. And even though Metcalfe has had 2 more fights and he's 7 years older, he's the fresher of the two. So you can look upon that as being an advantage. Or you could say that he hasn't been in as deep as Cheeseman. He's not proven kind of in the trenches in the same way that you could say that Cheeseman is. So there's kind of 2 different ways of looking at this fight. I'm not really decided which one where I settle on it, because I was talking to Barry Jones about it yesterday, me and Matt Macklin, and he made a great point, which is that knowing that you can go to the trenches, which Cheeseman does know, is a good thing to know. But if you do it too many times, there'll come a time where you reach for it and it's not there anymore. I don't think we're there yet, because it's not like he's had wars for his last 15 fights, but it's that kind of, it's a fine balance, this fight, and people are kind of thinking they'll fly at each other and meet in the middle. I'm not so sure they will, to be honest. I think this could be a little bit cagier than we think, but I do think that after maybe a little bit of a circumspect opening where they do have a bit of a look at each other, it will catch fire. It will catch fire at some point. I think I'll probably just favour Cheeseman, because I think that the hard fights he's had, although 2 of them have been defeats, he got a win last time out, which was crucial against Eglinton. I think those fights at this point in his career do give him the edge. But then again, Metcalfe, if he's required to dig really deep, I don't know that he can't. I'm just going on what's happened so far. And Cheeseman, I think, for me, is a bit more proven. But he's maybe more proven than Metcalfe. Metcalfe is more kind of potential. It's a great fight.
Kind of the common noise I'm hearing. I tell you what, I was impressed with Cheeseman. Not last time out when he lost to Fitzgerald. I actually thought he boxed really well. Quite often we're used to Cheeseman coming forward, and maybe that's what was his undoing at European level when he lost that. But he kind of learned from it, and I thought he boxed very, very cleverly. So it'll be interesting to see what style he adopts tomorrow night. But another great 50-50 fight, and like most of the card. Brings me on to the next one, if that's okay. Big favourite of mine, I have to be honest, a little bit biased there. Fabio Wardley, I love his story. A late developer in the sport, if you like, went through the white collar side, built a relationship with Dillian Whyte, and just seems to have sort of like really stepped up the last year, had some exposure in with Eddie in the lockdown. Big step up for him though against Molina. How do we expect that to go tomorrow?
Yeah, it's an interesting match, this, because what's always really kind of fascinating about these sorts of pairings is what do people think about them when they're made. And there's a chasm between these two in terms of experience. I mean, an enormous yawning great gulf, because Molina has challenged for 2 world titles. He's been in with some really, really good fighters. In terms of experience, there's light years between them. And really, if you go just by that, this should be no contest. Molina should take care of Wardley easily. It should be far too soon for Wardley. But I do think it's a good bit of matchmaking, because we saw Molina in Saudi against Hrgovic, who's a brutal heavyweight. And he was maybe a bit unlucky, Molina. I think he was caught around the back of the head a couple of times, and Hrgovic does tend to do that. And whilst I wouldn't say Molina looked disinterested, he didn't look that up for it either, to be honest. He's saying this week that he is more up for this one. And I would have thought he probably is, or at least he should be, because Wardley doesn't have the same reputation as Hrgovic. Hrgovic was an Olympian. He boxed about 30 times in WSB. Huge international amateur career, turned pro with a big fanfare. And like you said, Fabio's totally the opposite. Came through white collar, has done really, really well so far. But is he, on paper, he's not ready for someone who's got the resume that Molina has got. But I think at the point that Molina's at career-wise, I think they've picked the right kind of test for him. And I do think that he will. I do think that he will win. I think Molina will give it a good crack in the first 2 or 3 rounds. And after that, if he doesn't get any real success, I think he might lose interest quite quickly. But that's not to say that he couldn't make a real impact in those first 2 or 3, because he could. And we've never seen Fabio hurt or hit, really, particularly. So we don't know what will happen when that happens. But I do fancy him to win it. It's one of those, though, isn't it, where if he loses, people will be very quick to say, "Oh, that's a ridiculous match to make." Yeah. Look at the gulf between the two. It was obvious this was always going to happen. But no one's saying that this week. Lots of people said that after Josh Kelly got beaten by David Avanesian, but no one was saying it during fight week.
It's a great thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting that you say about the matchmaking. Again, Eddie is the master of it, but I thought that when Fabio came out last time, he destroyed Richard Lartey. I mean, some people felt that Lartey didn't come to fight and he gave in a bit too easy. But when people were sort of like lauding Dubois as the next world champion, it took Dubois a few more rounds to get rid of him. He's looked fantastic. Everything that's been put in front of Fabio, he's done great. And maybe if he's catching Molina at the right time, that could be good. But equally, as you say, I think Molina's experience, as you mentioned, he's been in with Joshua, he's been in with Wilder. These are top level operators. It was interesting yesterday at the press conference. I'm sure that Molina was saying, I don't even know who this guy is. And I genuinely believe that he didn't know who he was, which makes it even better because obviously if Fabio wins, it just maybe builds his stock even more.
Yeah, I could believe that easily, that he didn't know who Fabio Wardley was before he was asked to fight him. I can easily believe that. And he probably would have looked at the record and just thought, yeah, brilliant, I'll take this fight. Why wouldn't I take this fight? And I think his attitude towards it really is that he doesn't have a great deal to lose. He's definitely towards the tail end. And if he'd been offered another job against someone like Hrgović, I think he may have said no, but he would have looked at Fabio Wardley. And like I said before, he would have seen that he's not Filip Hrgović. Not on paper. He hasn't done all the things that Hrgović has done, quite simply. And I do think he'll give it a real go for a couple of rounds, and that could be enough. You know, we don't know. Lartey, it was a weird knockout against Lartey because I couldn't quite figure out how the shot that landed managed to do quite so much damage, but I was close enough to it, and he wasn't play acting. You know, you see them paramedics get in there with the oxygen. That was real. You know, nobody. So if he managed to pull that off, then you know he shouldn't be boxing. He should be doing something else. But it was a bit strange. But having said that, you're right. It was a step up, and he dealt with it comprehensively. And all you can do in that situation is give him the credit. I'd really love to see Fabio box for a British title. I think that'd be great. You know, I think nominally Joe Joyce is still British champion, isn't he? After beating Dubois, yeah. But
he'll vacate that, I'm sure, if he has to fight Usyk.
And I think what people were talking about was if Fabio beats Eric Molina, that they're not going to fool themselves that he's at world level if he beats Eric Molina. Nathan Gorman was what I was hearing possibly for the vacant title. I think that'd be great. I think that'd be really, really good because Gorman has, you know, been in that big fight with Daniel Dubois, which in the end Dubois won, you know, fairly comfortably. But he's a good fighter, Nathan Gorman. Definitely.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, last one I wanted to mention on the card tomorrow. Very romantic, if that's the right word, or a bit of nostalgia with Campbell Han. So obviously Ricky's son. Ricky is many fight fans' favourite fight from the last 10, 20 years. What are we expecting tomorrow when he makes his debut?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. I've not seen that much of him. There's bits to watch of him. He had a fairly brief amateur career. It is kind of an interesting story because he wasn't really pushed into boxing. They were quite big on that, Ricky and Matthew as well, that they weren't going to push him into it. And obviously he's in a fairly unusual position for a boxer in that because of Ricky's success, he's from a very kind of affluent background and really didn't need to box, but he's chosen to, which is interesting in itself. And his amateur career, you know, he did okay. They always felt that he was more suited to the pros. They were always going to turn pro this year, probably more towards the back end rather than now. But with there being no amateur boxing at the minute, he hasn't had a fight for a year. So they didn't want that to go on any longer. So they decided to turn over. And he does look pretty raw. They've got an opponent for him tomorrow where they've taken no chances at all. Jesus Ruiz is 0-10, but that's okay. That's fair enough. You know, it's a pro debut, relatively kind of hastily arranged, unusual circumstances, all of that. But he's been good fun, Campbell Hatton. He came down before AJ Pulev to the bubble and did a load of press, and Ricky was with him. And it's I mean, it's going to be an interesting ride. Like Conor Benn, when Conor turned over, he'd had 20 amateur fights. Very similar sort of thing. But I do think that with Campbell, it's slightly different. It's like with Eubank Jr. and Conor, the dads are legends, obviously, and everybody does remember them. Even you know, we remember them really well. But people younger than us will remember them too, or they'll know the name anyway. But with Hatton, because it's that bit more recent, I do think it's different. And definitely, I think the longer he's retired, Ricky, the more people begin to realise just what he did. I mean, in and out of the ring, because that, he had a brilliant professional career. He was a #1 in his division. I mean, you can't do any better than that, because everybody has a preferred weight. Only lost to Mayweather and Pacquiao. It does count against Senchenko, but it kind of doesn't.
I'm with you. Yeah.
There's no shame in that. And then you just look at the support he had, and it was absolutely crazy. And even just seeing him around, I've seen him loads of times, but it's still always kind of like, oh, it's a hitman, because he was my era. Like I remember staying up to watch that Mayweather fight, and I was like late 20s, and I remember his career starting, and there's just that aura around Hatton, and having another Hatton and having Matthews training him, and Ricky there is just, it's just different in a way that it just makes you remember what it was like when he was fighting, and it was like nothing else really. I don't know if we'll ever have anybody like that again in terms of the excitement that it generated. I mean, that Mayweather fight was mental, wasn't it? I mean, do you remember the build up to that? With 24/7 and all the rest of it. It was just
like the first time I remember a build up like 24/7 or a documentary with it. And I remember reading stuff at the time, and I read it again recently around how the casinos were saying in Vegas they'd run out of beer. They were like, I don't know what's going on here. All these Brits have come over, and we've got no beer in the casinos in Vegas. Well, look, whatever his journey is, it'll be fantastic. I think again, Eddie's there. You mentioned it. I was about to say it. Conor Benn, they've done fantastic with him. Conor's career's gone from strength to strength through Conor, I'm sure, and Tony Sims in the team there. But Eddie's matched him well, and I'm sure they'll do the same with Hatton, which will be fantastic. Just one last one, if it's okay. The big fight that we're all waiting to be announced is AJ against Fury. I know Eddie's kind of hinted that it has been sealed and agreed, but without a venue. Are we expecting an official announcement soon? And any idea where the venue might be?
I think he'd be hopeful of getting something announced fairly soon. I mean, things are obviously very different and have been for the last year. And I think one of the ways in which they're different, although this had been kind of changing a bit in that, we over the last couple of years, we got to a stage where fights were getting announced and cards were getting announced later and later, kind of on the inside of it. We knew that they were happening, but for whatever reason, they were choosing not to announce them until quite late. And I don't know, I never felt that really worked particularly, because it would look like an opponent had been found for, say, someone like Buatsi at 3 weeks' notice, when actually they hadn't, because this had been in place and planned for a while. But I'll get slightly off the subject. But with AJ against Fury, I do think he wants to announce something fairly soon, because if they want to do it late June, early July, then people just need to know what's going on. And it's fine to say that they've agreed. And I believe that. I believe that the will is there for they want to fight each other, and that it's going to happen. And they know that wherever they go with it, whatever money they've tentatively or preliminarily agreed will be there, because I've heard people say, well, until money's agreed, then nothing's agreed. But you know what you're going to get for this.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to pay them. That's not a problem. But until you've got a venue and a date, then realistically, you don't actually have a fight. There'll be no press tour or anything like that, or press conference. So usually the kind of 14-week lead time that you would like to have for a Joshua fight, that doesn't matter at the minute, because none of that stuff's happening. But I think everybody involved would just like to get that first fight over the line. And I do think it will happen late June, early July. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't. And I'd say at the minute, the front runner would be Saudi. I saw Eddie say recently that maybe Wembley could be a possibility for July. I just don't see it.
I think, isn't it? I mean, if you're relying on fans in July, if all it takes is something to happen, and you've got 90,000 down to zero. So if the money's in Saudi, it makes sense. And then the rematch they can do in December, January in Cardiff, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I just think with the first one, if they want to do them both this year, and they do want to do them both this year, and that's the right thing to do. But I think this is peak time for it. I think it's an example of a rare example of a massive fight happening exactly when it should happen, because I think the timing for it is completely perfect. 2-fight deal, 2 fights this year, just brilliant. Really, really good for the sport, good for everyone. A shame that the first one, I don't think will be in the UK, but everybody understands the situation, and you've just got to go somewhere where you know that you can plan and it's actually going to happen. And you know, the site fee that they'll get over there will be considerable, probably more than they would make from ticket sales, even 90,000 of them at Wembley. And it's a good time. It's a good time for the UK too. It's you know, it's suitable for the UK audience, which is, you know, that's really important for this. Well, you cannot have an all British fight for the undisputed world heavyweight championship. All got to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning for it. I mean, I've never heard that was ever a possibility, but that would be absolute bullshit, wouldn't it? I mean, imagine that. You know, it's this is something else, and we've got to make sure that it's watched by as many people as possible.
Definitely. Well, look, we'll wait for that announcement. Thank you so much for your time. I will let you go. I know you've got a busy day tomorrow to commentate, and I hope it all goes well. And we'll look forward to picking up with you soon. Thanks so much for your time, Andy.
No problem.
Cheers, bud. Thank you.
So if you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit the like, subscribe, and share. As always, if you want to support us to the next level, head over to the patreon.com/ThaBoxingVoice. We have tons of exclusive from Border Wars, Entitled, betting shows. The list goes on and on and on. But in addition to that, if you guys have questions for fighters, trainers, and promoters, this is where you can submit them. We will run out, get these questions answered, and put it back on the show just for you guys. Appreciate it. Peace.